Mai's world was a tapestry woven with minute observations. The precise number of cracks in the third window pane of the library. She'd counted 117 just last week. The subtle shift in the scent of the cafeteria depending on whether they were serving pizza or fish sticks. The almost imperceptible wobble in the head of the statue of the school's founder in the main hall. These details, invisible to most, were the very essence of Northwood High for her. Unfortunately, this intense focus on the periphery made her a constant source of irritation for both students and teachers. During Mr. Harrison's lecture on the American Civil War, Mai had once interrupted to point out that the map hanging on the wall depicted a state that hadn't existed at the time. The class had erupted in snickers, and Mr. Harrison had sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Mai, with all due respect, could you perhaps focus on the broader historical context? In the crowded hallways, her habit of stopping abruptly to examine a loose floor tile or the way the sunlight filtered through a dusty window often led to minor collisions and muttered complaints. "Watch it, Mai." "Seriously, what are you even looking at?" were common refrains. Even her usually patient best friend, Liam, would sometimes grow frustrated. "Mai, we're going to be late for chemistry. Just leave the spiderweb alone." One particularly memorable incident occurred during school assembly. The principal was droning on about upcoming fundraising initiatives when Mai became completely engrossed in counting the number of individual light bulbs in the auditorium ceiling. She was so engrossed, in fact, that she didn't notice when the person next to her nudged her to stand for the school anthem. Mrs. Gable, the notoriously strict English teacher, had spotted her. The subsequent public scolding, delivered with theatrical flair, had earned Mai a fresh wave of embarrassed glances from her classmates. The end of the school year loomed, casting a shadow of uncertainty over Northwood High. Rumors of budget cuts had intensified, fueled by hushed conversations in the teacher's lounge and worried looks on the faces of the administration. There were whispers of program cancellations, potential staff reductions, and even the unthinkable, the possibility of the school closing its doors for good. The atmosphere in the once vibrant hallways had become heavy with anxiety. The final assembly of the year was usually a celebratory affair, but this time a palpable tension filled the auditorium. Principal Thompson, his face etched with worry lines that seemed to have deepened overnight, stepped onto the stage. His usual booming voice was subdued as he addressed the anxious crowd. "Students, faculty, and staff," he began, his words hanging in the air. "As you are all aware, Northwood High has been facing significant financial challenges." He went on to outline the grim reality, the dwindling resources, and the very real threat to the school's future. A collective sigh swept through the auditorium, the weight of the news settling heavily on everyone present. Just as despair threatened to engulf the room, Principal Thompson's demeanor shifted. A glimmer of hope appeared in his tired eyes. "However," he announced, his voice gaining strength, "I have some truly remarkable news. An individual deeply committed to the future of Northwood High has come forward with an incredibly generous offer." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Who could it be? A long-lost alumnus who had struck it rich? A philanthropic organization with a passion for education? The anticipation was thick enough to cut with a knife. This benefactor, Principal Thompson continued, his gaze sweeping across the sea of hopeful faces, wishes to remain anonymous at this time. But I can assure you that their contribution will not only secure the future of Northwood High, but will also allow for significant improvements to our facilities and programs. A collective gasp of relief and excitement filled the auditorium. For the first time in weeks, a sense of optimism permeated the air. As the assembly drew to a close, Principal Thompson made one final announcement. Following this assembly, there will be a brief reception in the gymnasium for all faculty and staff to meet the representative of our anonymous benefactor. While the rest of the students began to filter out, buzzing with renewed hope, Mai, as was her habit, lingered behind. Her attention had been caught by a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the podium. She was tracing its intricate pattern with her eyes when she saw them. Principal Thompson was standing near the gymnasium doors, talking to a tall, well-dressed man with an air of quiet authority. Something about the man's posture, the way he held his hands clasped behind his back, sparked a flicker of recognition in Mai's mind. As she got closer, she noticed more details. The subtle way the man adjusted his glasses, a gesture she'd seen before, though she couldn't quite place where. The faint scent of old books and leather that seemed to emanate from him. And then she saw it, a small, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand as he gestured while speaking. It was the same tremor she had observed in Mr. Henderson's hand during history class. Hesitantly, Mai approached them. Principal Thompson beamed at her. Mai. Always the observant one. Mr. Finch, this is one of our most attentive students. He chuckled slightly, the word attentive carrying a hint of irony. Mr. Finch turned, and his eyes met Mai's. A warm, gentle smile spread across his face, a smile that seemed to hold a depth of understanding. Hello, Mai, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Principal Thompson continued, oblivious to the subtle exchange between them. Mr. Finch has been asking about the school, its history, its unique characteristics. I was just telling him about Mai's comprehensive knowledge of Northwood's every nook and cranny. Mr. Finch's smile deepened, and he looked directly at Mai. Yes, he said, his gaze filled with a knowing warmth. I've heard you have a remarkable understanding of this place. He paused for a moment, and then, in a move that caused a ripple of stunned silence among the few teachers who were still nearby, he reached out and gently touched Mai's arm. You know, Mai, he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of amusement, I've always believed that the devil is in the details, and that's often where the real beauty lies. He then turned back to Principal Thompson, his tone shifting to one of authority. Principal, he said, if you'll excuse us for a moment, I believe it's time I had a proper introduction to my daughter. The air in the hallway seemed to thicken. Principal Thompson's jaw dropped slightly, his eyes widening in disbelief. A group of teachers who had been chatting nearby fell silent, their conversations abruptly cut short. Even Liam, who had just walked in, stopped dead in his tracks, his usual easygoing expression replaced with one of utter shock. Mai stared at the man, her mind racing, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The familiar tremor, the scent of old books, the knowing smile. It all pointed to one unbelievable truth. Dad, she whispered, the word feeling both strange and utterly right on her tongue. Mr. Finch, his eyes twinkling with amusement and affection, smiled warmly. Hello, my dear, he said, his voice filled with a love that transcended the years of unspoken connection. It seems my little observer has finally put all the pieces together. The news spread through Northwood High like wildfire. The girl who was constantly being scolded for her obsessions, the girl who knew the school better than anyone else, was the daughter of the anonymous benefactor who had just saved their beloved institution. The very details they had mocked her for noticing were, in fact, the keys to understanding a secret that had been hidden in plain sight. The reactions were a mixture of disbelief, astonishment, and a dawning sense of respect. The students who had snickered now looked at her with a newfound curiosity. The teachers who had sighed in exasperation suddenly remembered her insightful observations. Even Mrs. Gable offered a hesitant, almost apologetic smile. Northwood High remained open, and the promised upgrades began. But the most significant change was in the way people looked at Mai. They still saw her noticing the subtle details, but now they understood. Her obsessions weren't a distraction. They were a unique way of seeing the world, a deep and profound connection to the place she called her school, a place that, unbeknownst to everyone, had always been a part of her family. And Mai, the girl who was always being scolded, finally understood that her unique way of seeing the world was not a flaw, but a remarkable inheritance. Did this story blow your mind? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of unexpected twists and turns, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more captivating stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.